So let's get back to Iran. You just mentioned that blocking the Strait would deal a heavy blow to the Revolutionary Guard's economy. What I'm seeing now is that the Iranian side is urgently trying to find ways to respond. It seems they've issued notices to various provinces, asking them to come up with solutions, maybe developing other, land routes or some other methods. Then they're working on developing these alternative routes and exporting goods to places like China, Russia, or other countries. Do you think these alternative channels could possibly offset the losses from the Strait being blocked, at least in the short term?
You can't really efficiently transport and move crude oil over land unless you first build massive, extensive networks of large-scale pipelines. But even then, it's simply not something you can build in a brief or limited window of time. And as for the sheer complexity of these pipelines, they're also very vulnerable to attacks. For example, it's very easy for planes to bomb them. Besides that, you can't rely on trucks or even trains to transport oil. The efficiency would be extremely low, so that's just not possible. If you look at the international situation...
This is just another kind of propaganda battle.
It's just propaganda, nothing more. This is something that's simply impossible to achieve.
Oh, but I do think the situation is actually quite serious because from the analysis I've seen, and you just mentioned this as well, the current oil storage is already at 60%. That is, the facilities capable of storing oil are already 60% full. If crude oil can't be exported right now and the oil wells keep producing, then the remaining 40% of storage could be used up within the next 2 weeks. Once the storage is full, the oil wells will have to be shut down. Is that really the case?
All the current analyses are saying the same thing. I mean, I'm not an expert in this field, but still. But I think even if, as they say, after the oil wells are shut down, the damage is permanent, this is a long-term loss for them, not just the fact that they can't sell those 1.5 million barrels of crude oil per day. Right? Suffering a loss of several $100 million like that, even the Revolutionary Guard wouldn't be able to handle it, right? Of course, at the beginning, they might be able to hold out for a while because it's said that Iran has stored some oil offshore outside the Persian Gulf. Since this oil isn't subject to the restrictions of the Persian Gulf, they might still be able to sell some of it for now. That is, I don't know if they're storing it on cruise ships or something else at sea, but they're just shipping it out directly. That might be enough to keep things going for another 2 or 3 weeks. But if this blockade continues, I really don't see any way for Iran or for the Revolutionary Guard to have any means to withstand or alleviate this pressure.
Right. So now regarding the demands from the U.S. side, what I've seen is that it's very clear. One of them is, of course, as Trump has said, Iran must never have nuclear weapons. Now, some media reports, I'm not sure if this is just one possibility, say that the U.S. is demanding Iran not enrich uranium for 20 years, while Iran says it can agree to 5 years. But today, Trump has already made it clear to the media saying, I don't like this 20 years. He said, well, what I want is for them to never have it, ever. Doing this, enriching uranium, means they can't develop nuclear weapons. I think that's one point. Another point is the complete opening of the Strait of Hormuz. So do you think that if negotiations resume, the Iranian side or the Revolutionary Guard might agree to these two demands?
Ultimately, it comes down to how much the economic blockade of the Strait of Hormuz can strike at the Revolutionary Guard, and whether, in the end, they truly feel they are facing a life or death decision and have no choice but to agree, right? For them, this is the most crucial point, especially now for Iran. In this war, it has taken down Khamenei and dismantled Iran's theocratic system. Absolute ruling authority. Now, the Revolutionary Guard, to a large extent, is a vested interest group, right? It was originally established as the Revolutionary Guard Corps. It was created to protect Iran's theocratic rule, but after so many years of development, the Revolutionary Guard has built its own economic system, its own way of making money. So, to a large extent, its main goal is to protect its own group's interests. Right? Their own Revolutionary Guard members, the families of the Revolutionary Guard, and those with vested interests connected to the Guard. He wants to protect the basic ability of these people to survive and to continue enjoying these economic benefits. As for those so-called Islamic ideals, or Khamenei's ideals, for the Revolutionary Guard, in reality, those ideals are not actually that important. So, as long as the pressure is great enough, I believe that in the end, the Revolutionary Guard will make concessions. They have no other choice. Otherwise, they would go down together with the Iranian government and the Iranian economy. If the Iranian economy really collapses, the Revolutionary Guard would not have the ability to survive on its own either. right? Especially now that the maritime smuggling routes have been completely blocked by the United States. In fact, it's not just this. Earlier, when Trump targeted Venezuela to a large extent, that was also a way to indirectly block Iran, because Iran's money laundering through Hezbollah and so on operates in this way. In the international market, a lot of these operations were carried out through Venezuela, right? Now that Venezuela has been taken out, Iran has lost an important channel for external connections. And then fighting with the Gulf countries, right? The UAE used to be a very important channel for Iran's funds and overseas circulation, but now the UAE has also shut that down. So, in other words, internationally, he feels that his current situation is much more isolated than before the war started. He really doesn't have any other way out to save himself. In the end, it will gradually become basically what Trump did was to block him off from all directions, right? In the end, he only left him one way out, what the Chinese traditionally call where there is life, there must be a gap, right? You still have to leave him a way to survive, and that way out is for him to sign a peace agreement with me. Right. Besides that, you don't have any other options for survival. So we can observe how much the Revolutionary Guard can actually withstand pressure, how much they can resist this kind of pressure. Right. I have serious doubts about this. I mean, I think that in reality, especially after suffering such a heavy blow militarily, if they want to recover, they need money. But now, all their sources of funding have been completely cut off. Right, I just don't see that he has any other way out, unless he just says, well, I don't care about anything anymore, because if you want to take charge, then go ahead, right? I'll just make sure that I can still survive at the most basic level. If that's the case, then it doesn't really matter. Basically, Iran will just become weaker and weaker. And it also won't pose any external threat to others.
Yes, that's exactly what I was about to say. After all, we can see that the Trump administration is indeed putting tremendous economic pressure on Iran from all directions. For example, I saw today that the Treasury Department has already notified China, Russia, and some other countries, including many financial institutions in Hong Kong, saying, if you continue to conduct these kinds of financial transactions with Iran, we will start imposing secondary sanctions. Also, previously, when the conflict just broke out, the sanctions on Iran's crude oil shipments by sea were temporarily lifted, but now that exemption is about to expire. It seems that in a few days, those sanctions will be reinstated. So overall, the economic noose is tightening more and more. But for the Iranian regime, to what extent does an economic blow translate into a blow to the regime itself? For example, take a country like North Korea. It's very poor, yet its regime still seems extremely solid and unbreakable.
Right. But what about the Revolutionary Guard? It's actually different from the situation in North Korea. North Korea is basically a very strong, very powerful dictatorship. Essentially, the Kim family controls everything, right? There's no state within a state. But Iran is different. In Iran, the Revolutionary Guard is actually a state within a state. Of course, it is the most powerful force, and it controls the whole of Iran. But it's not in control of every key sector in Iran, and it's not the only ruling force within the country, right? It's still somewhat weaker in that sense, and there are still some other forces at play, right? And we saw that not long ago there was even an outbreak in Iran. Large-scale protests and demonstrations where bazaar merchants, intellectuals, and ordinary citizens unite, right? They raise their voices to challenge the theocratic government. This kind of thing, these kinds of voices, you would absolutely never see in a country like North Korea.
Right.
So the Revolutionary Guard is actually able to successfully maintain and consolidate this kind of rule entirely through its own independent efforts. That is to say, it can consistently support and sustain a very powerful military force, and it can also provide substantial economic benefits to its many supporters. If these people have economic benefits, only then do they dare to support it, right? If you cut off the domestic funding sources for the Revolutionary Guard, it won't be able to recover militarily because it suffered heavy losses during the war and has no way to restore itself militarily. Then, if it also loses the ability to continue providing economic benefits to its supporters, the domestic support for the Revolutionary Guard will weaken. It will keep getting weaker and weaker, and its ability to govern will also keep declining. Moreover, its ability to project power externally will almost completely disappear, because supporting groups like Hezbollah and the Houthis costs a lot of money, right? If this money is cut off, then in the end, even the Iranian people themselves will ask, what is the point of having the Revolutionary Guard? The only thing it does is take money from us and use it to support others, right? I believe that he won't be able to sustain this.
As for the current head of the Revolutionary Guard, what's his name, Vahidiha? I've always been a bit curious. I thought that Israel's targeted assassinations might at any time take out this leader as well. But so far it seems that hasn't happened. So does Israel actually intend to do this? Is their plan basically that as long as you're radical, they'll take you out? And then if the next one is still radical, I'll just keep taking you out until a moderate one appears. Does Israel have a similar plan or strategy for the Revolutionary Guard as well?
Just yesterday, the current head of the Mossad, David Barnea, delivered a very significant public speech. During his remarks, he explicitly stated that the eventual overthrow of Iran's existing theocratic government remains a primary, long-term strategic goal for the State of Israel. Essentially, he was clarifying that this regime change is one of their most fundamental and enduring national security objectives for the future. And as for this goal, he said it would be carried out in stages. There have been a lot of rumors outside saying that before the war, Mossad gave Trump a very optimistic chart, suggesting that with just one strike, the theocratic regime would collapse. In reality, this is completely false information. No country would ever say such a thing to Trump. And as for Trump himself, with the way his mind works, he wouldn't believe it either, right? I don't believe it, and he made it clear. He said so himself. He said there was never any such mistake, and in fact, Mossad's assessment has always been that we do not believe that during the war there would be large-scale turmoil within Iran that could overthrow this regime. However, even if the war ends, even if there is a complete ceasefire, the efforts to overthrow the Iranian theocratic regime will still continue. This will keep going until, in the end, there is a complete regime change in Iran. So this process, he says, requires time. It's not as if you just replace one person and immediately kill them. Does that make sense? For instance, if we look at the current leadership of Hezbollah, he is someone who hasn't been targeted or killed yet either. If your strategy is aiming for this specific kind of long-term and relatively gradual effort, then it is really about consistently applying pressure and continuously striking over time, which slowly and steadily brings about a real change. So in many of these complex cases, you simply need to give the process some more time. On the other hand, if you want to eliminate a top leader, you need time to prepare both in terms of intelligence and military operations, right? So when it comes to directly taking someone out, they would rather wait and see what this person will actually do next, rather than act immediately. That's how dictatorships operate, you see? The will of the entire regime comes from the will of that supreme leader. Right? This is a characteristic of a dictatorship, isn't it? When the supreme leader dies or is eliminated, the will of the entire dictatorship actually changes. But for this change to happen, it takes some time, right? Because a new power structure needs to be established, and how that power is distributed, like right now in Iran, who really has the final say, how things will be decided, it all needs time. There will be a period of chaos, but during this period of chaos, you'll have a great opportunity to closely observe and evaluate these talented newcomers to see what exactly their innovative ideas and unique perspectives are, right? You can consider whether they might possibly become your future collaborators or perhaps become your long-term strategic partners in reaching a successful deal for everyone involved. This is especially evident in today's US-Israel alliance, right? Trump, to a large extent, actually completely changed the basic logic of US foreign intervention over the past several decades. In the past, the basic logic of US foreign intervention was that, not only do I have to be responsible for eliminating a hostile regime, but I also have to be responsible for rebuilding that country as a whole, right? No matter how much it costs, I want to turn it into a democratic, free, and prosperous nation, just like Japan and Germany after World War II, right? So this approach over the past few decades, especially in the Middle East, but also in East Asia, in places like Vietnam, basically ended in complete failure, right? As for Israel, after decades of war, because the country is small and its power is limited, its strength is not that great either. So their approach has always been what you might call only responsible for killing, not for raising, right? That is, I never think about helping you build anything, but if someone threatens me, I eliminate that threat, and then I see what happens next, right? To a large extent, Trump's current approach is somewhat similar to what Israel has done over the past few decades. That is, I eliminate your main threats, right? In this war, I take out your nuclear threat, your missile threat, and your threat to this, support for surrounding terrorist groups and so on, right? So what happens next? Well, I don't plan to go in and invest that much, right, to overthrow your regime and then help you rebuild the country, like what happened in Afghanistan, where I'd be stuck there for decades and spend trillions of dollars. Trump wouldn't consider doing that. Instead, Trump would watch, just like with Venezuela, to see if among the new people who come to power, there's anyone who might be able to make a deal with him, right? It might not necessarily turn into a very good Iran, but to a large extent, the question is whether Iran can be rendered harmless, basically turning it into a harmless Iran. On the other hand, of course, if the United States could control Iran's oil, control the oil in the Persian Gulf, right, that would, of course, greatly intensify the conflict to a significant degree. As for the United States, with its overall strategic capabilities or its economic status, it will definitely try to find ways to act, right? But it won't be in a rush like before to completely overthrow the entire old regime and help establish a brand new government.
Yes.
Right. Some time ago, Trump said, some people might think he was bragging or just trying to save face for himself, but he said that regime change has actually already happened. Right, he said.
What, 2 or 3 times already? Is that so?
Yes, exactly. What he means is this is actually a new kind of logic, but in fact, it's also the logic Israel has followed for decades. That is, regime change doesn't necessarily mean completely overthrowing your government and establishing an entirely new one. Regime change can also mean that I eliminate the most harmful elements within your government, and then we see if we can work with the healthier forces that remain within your government. Some relatively reasonable forces, reaching some kind of deal with them, right? Reaching some kind of deal. This brings us back to the cost theory we talked about at the very beginning, which is the most crucial point. For a country like the United States, there's no need to insist on a complete and total victory. They're definitely going to win, right? But there's no need for them to win in such a way that, for example, just to catch a fish, they end up smashing the entire kitchen. The cost would be too high, right? The cost would be excessive. They can afford to take their time. They can afford to be patient. I can wait for things inside to slowly change, right?
Yeah, and also, right now, the situation with the Supreme Leader, Mossad, is still unclear. We don't know if he's conscious or if he's still in a coma.
There's also no news at all from the women's side about this. There's just no information. So at present, everything about him is just rumors, right? So in fact, in the most extreme scenario, the real question is whether this person is even still alive.
Right. This really is, if this person truly isn't playing any role anymore, then you could really say that the second generation leader is gone too, and the regime is now already in its third generation. The third generation, the third group of people are now running this country. So far, it seems that the pressure is only increasing, and at least the divisions and conflicts within the regime itself also appear to be growing. If, as you said, the economic blockade is directly fatal to the Revolutionary Guard, then it's really possible that there could be some concessions. But what I find very interesting now is that there is a specific red line. America has a specific red line, which is that batch of enriched uranium, that batch of 400 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium, and possibly also including other 20% enriched uranium as well. The current American red line is that this batch of uranium must be shipped out of Iran. On the Iranian side, probably led by the Revolutionary Guard, their stance is that this uranium must remain in Iran. They say, we can dilute it, and that's their position. They say, we have already offered to dilute this uranium, but we do not want to ship it out. So this is also an issue in the negotiations. I think this might be a point where both sides are unsure if they can reach an agreement. Today, I saw that. Did Trump call Modi? Some people are saying that, according to reports, Trump is asking Modi whether this batch of enriched uranium can be shipped to India. There are even people speculating, based on current signs, whether Trump might also appear at this second round of negotiations. What do you think of these analyses or rumors?
For example, it doesn't really matter which country Iran ships it to. This was before the war. If I recall correctly, it was still during last year's 12-day war. There was even a proposal to ship this oil to Russia.
Ah, yes, that's right.
It doesn't matter if Russia is willing to accept it either. As long as the oil doesn't stay in Iran's hands, it's fine, right? This is a very clear point. The oil cannot remain in Iran because one of the most basic conditions in the negotiations is that Iran cannot engage in activities related to developing nuclear weapons. All these nuclear projects must be stopped. When you have this kind of high energy, high concentration, 5G grade material, such highly enriched uranium in Iran's hands, what are you planning to do with it, right? Logically, this definitely doesn't make sense. So if an agreement is reached, this uranium definitely won't remain in Iran, right? There shouldn't be any issue with that. Personally, I don't believe Trump himself would go to Pakistan to participate in these negotiations. Because his counterpart isn't Iran's supreme leader, right? This isn't an equal negotiation. In fact, even if Vance goes, that's already beyond the usual protocol. For this kind of negotiation, actually, just Witkoff and Kushner would be enough, right? So I don't know about you, but as for Trump in this matter, in the end, I can't predict it. Maybe if he's invited, he'll just go himself. But I think if he does go, it would be a small group, but very high profile. And there's really no need for that. There's no need for that.
Yeah, right. But as for Iran, I think even if an agreement is reached, if the Iranian Revolutionary Guard really feels too much pressure and says, okay, I'll give up the oil, I'll give up nuclear weapons, I'll agree to give you the oil, then what about the Strait issue? Of course, that's relatively simpler, but can this really be trusted? How can we ensure that they abide by the agreement?
You've really hit the nail on the head with this question. Iranians are very well known for this kind of thing, for telling lies and packaging them up very nicely. It's a cultural tradition. They have this concept in Islam called taqiyya, this tradition of taqiyya. To put it simply, if you are facing a life or death situation, you are allowed to lie. And that lying can even include lying about religious matters. The original purpose of this practice was, for example, if you are facing religious persecution, let's say someone asks you, are you a Muslim? If you are, I will kill you. If you are a Christian, I won't. In this kind of situation, according to the principle of taqiyya, you are allowed to lie and say, I am not a Muslim, I am a Christian. That's in the religious context. Now, within Persian tradition itself, they also have a similar tradition, and there is a specific term for it. I can't quite recall that word right now. I think it's something like tarosi or something similar. Anyway, it's a similar term. We can look it up later. But there is this concept, a uniquely Persian concept, which is, to put it kindly, basically, telling a lie with good intentions is not a problem. So telling a lie with good intentions, what does that mean? It means, for example, for the sake of politeness or social interaction, it is permissible to lie. Lying is allowed. In other words, what you say doesn't necessarily have to be exactly what you're thinking. Right? Let me give you a simple example. For instance, if you visit an Iranian's home, or just meet with an ordinary Iranian and chat with them, say you compliment them and say, the watch you're wearing, this watch is really nice, it's really beautiful, isn't it? The Iranian will immediately take off that watch from their wrist and say right away that they're giving this watch to you as a gift. But at this point, this is your cue, right? You absolutely cannot accept this watch. If you take the watch, then you'll be in big trouble later, right? So for Iranians, offering you the watch is something they have to say. But at the same time as saying this, it means that he absolutely doesn't really want to give you the watch. Maybe that's just an excuse. But for Iranians, this is a kind of lie that is actually praised, a kind of lie that is appreciated. So when Iran lies during these international negotiations, it's basically, well, ever since before Trump, for decades, Iran has been deceiving the international community, using these kinds of lies to trick the world. Back then, when Israel stole that half-ton of nuclear documents from Iran, it was to prove to Trump, to the US government, but mainly to Trump, since he was president at the time, that Iran's so-called stance on the nuclear issue was actually a lie all along, and that Iran had been making false promises to the international community. They claimed not to be developing nuclear weapons, but behind the scenes, they were always working on them, right? So, in fact, the first time Iran was not the one doing the deceiving at the negotiating table, but was actually deceived itself, was under Trump. He couldn't pull it off either, and ended up being deceived twice. So the Iranians, well, now they feel that Trump is even more skilled at playing these tricks than we are. That's why we can't trust Trump either, right? So this really is a problem. That is to say, Iran might now, if the Revolutionary Guard is smart, they might agree first and then do things secretly behind the scenes, right? But actually, there are many ways to monitor this. Nowadays, our satellite reconnaissance capabilities and technology are extremely advanced. Israel, including the CIA, has deeply infiltrated Iran, so it's impossible for Iran to truly do anything in secret. Whatever they do, the outside world will definitely find out right away. And at that point, whether it's the US or Israel, there are still plenty of follow-up measures they can take. Right? There are a lot of options. So basically, Iran trying to deceive others is a given, right? But under the current circumstances, with its navy destroyed, air force destroyed, and air defense systems taken out, if in the future they really try to do something, hitting them again or imposing further sanctions would be relatively easy.
Yes, taking military action or imposing sanctions themselves is easy, but it depends on whether those in power have the willingness, whether they have the will. Now, with Trump in office, of course, he might be a bit more restrained, but 2 years from now, if Trump is no longer in office or if Netanyahu steps down, this will always remain a risk. Of course, we can only say that if the US and Israel can, during this process, even if not explicitly changing the Iranian regime, at least render it harmless. Just as you mentioned earlier, I think that's quite accurate. This could very well be their goal, because today I saw Vance also saying, we hope that Iran becomes something like making Iran a wealthy country and so on. Also, it's like make Iran great again or something along those lines. So it's possible that they're also testing to see if under this kind of extreme pressure, they can get the current group of people to become less radical or less extreme.
Right. So what this means is that in a dictatorship, after you remove the top group of people, the ones who come after will definitely change, right? You just need some time or maybe apply a bit more pressure and then observe which direction they change in, right? If they change in a direction that you think is beneficial to you, then there's no need to keep attacking and overthrowing the entire government, right? So at least for now, this is widely recognized. This is something everyone agrees on.